A new dawn has broken, has it not? We always said that if we had the courage to change, then we could do it, and we did it.
The Princess Elizabeth has agreed to accept the crown and rule as Queen.
Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, ascended to the throne and was crowned Queen at the tender age of 27. Since that historic day, Her Majesty has worked with over a dozen prime ministers who have formed successive governments on her behalf.
I've just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind offer to form a new administration of government in this country.
Prime Minister, I know that you, like your predecessors, will always pass such messages as you read them without fear or favour.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
And as you stood side by side with us then, we stand side by side with you now. My judgment as Prime Minister is that this threat is real, growing, and of an entirely different nature to any conventional threat to our security that Britain has faced before.
The decision to go to war in Iraq was the hardest, most momentous, most agonizing decision I took in my 10 years as British Prime Minister.
The basic motivation, the belief in social justice, the notion that a fairer, more decent society helps the individual, to me that is a Christian as well as a socialist idea.
Tony Blair became Her Majesty's 10th Prime Minister and would end up being one of the most controversial during her reign.
The only thing I ever object to is when people insist on running this as an issue of my integrity or saying that I made up the intelligence, rather than simply take it that you had to make a decision about it.
He led Labour to victory after 18 years of Conservative rule and went on to become the longest-running Labour Prime Minister of all time.
And just to reinforce the length of your reign, the latest of your Prime Ministers was not even born when you held the first audience with your first Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill. You, ma'am, are a symbol of unity in a world of insecurity, of continuity in a world where nothing stays the same. I believe that you have succeeded because you have a quality that is not a quality that belongs alone to kings or queens, presidents or prime ministers, or to the famous and celebrated. It is a quality that is the very best of the British character, and when we find it, we recognize it immediately.
But how would his plans for radical reform hold up against a queen with decades of experience? Tony Blair, Her Majesty's 10th Prime Minister. The relationship between the sovereign, the government, and her prime minister is somewhat complex and not always easily understood. As head of state, the Queen must remain entirely neutral with respect to political matters and must be seen to do so. The Queen does not vote nor stand for election. However, she does have vitally important ceremonial and formal roles and responsibilities in relation to the government of the United Kingdom. The British legislature comprises the Sovereign, the House of Lords, and the House of Commons. The Queen's duties include opening each new session of Parliament, a fascinating event steeped in history and tradition going back hundreds of years. It is symbolically important, but it also clearly demonstrates the separation of the monarchy from the workings of Parliament, a vital principle of the British constitutional monarchy. After much preamble and the ceremonial arrival of the sovereign and her regalia, the Queen awaits the MPs, the members of the House of Commons. Black Rod, a title as well as an actual black piece of wood, walks through to the Commons, where the door is slammed in their face, symbolizing the independence of the Commons from the monarchy. They knock 3 times on the same piece of worn and battered wood which has been in place for centuries, and the door is opened, thus allowing them to enter and to summon the MPs to pay attention to their monarch in the House of Lords.
My government believe in open government. Consultation on draft legislation is a contribution to this. They propose that a draft Freedom of Information Bill be given pre-legislative scrutiny in both houses. My government will also publish in draft several bills, including those to reform party funding, to improve council's conduct of business, and to establish a strategic rail authority.
The Queen also has a very special working and private relationship with her prime ministers. Her Majesty retains the right to appoint her prime minister, and also to meet with him or her on a regular basis. Those private weekly meetings have offered great solace and support to her prime ministers, each one honoring the absolute confidentiality of these informal talks, but each of whom has also acknowledged the personal support they have received in what must often be a lonely position of responsibility. Anthony Blair's start in life could not have been further from the grassroots and socialist ideals of the Labour Party he went on to lead. Born in 1953 in Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland, and just a month before the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, and a year after she had succeeded to the throne, baby Tony was the son of a prominent lawyer, Leo Blair, a staunch conservative supporter, whose political ambition spurred him to run for Parliament as a Conservative when Tony Blair was just 10 years old. Young Tony's time in Scotland was short-lived, as the family moved to Australia towards the end of 1954, when his father was offered a position as lecturer in law at the University of Adelaide. Returning to the UK at the tender age of 5, the family relocated to Durham, again for his father's work.
From Durham Chorister School, Tony Blair won an exhibition to the Grand Scottish Boarding School of Fettes. It was not a typical background for a potential leader of the Labour Party.
We had a perfectly good average middle-class standard of living, but there's a tendency sometimes for people to think that, if you went to public school, then you were sort of like little Lord Fauntleroy or something. I mean, it's not, there are various sort of gradations in this, and sure, of course I was very lucky in my background, very lucky indeed. And that's something I have cause to be fortunate for, because not merely did I have a strong family, I got a decent education. That's one of the reasons I think education is so important.
At St John's College, Oxford, he chose to study law in the tradition of many politicians, although he was not at that stage considering a parliamentary career. He was following in his father's footsteps in his choice of discipline, but he rejected his father's political ideology, which was conservatism.
I understood exactly what motivated people like my father to become Thatcherite Tories, which is really what they were. I mean, in a sense, they're not really conservatives, a lot of those people. I mean, they're right-wing radicals, and I always used to say this to him, that because he underestimated the importance of Scottish state education and giving him his chance. There is an element of self-made people that forget that, in fact, they didn't quite make it all themselves.
The stage and music business beckoned him, and he took up performing with his guitar in a rock band called Ugly Rumors, and occasionally doing stand-up for his fellow students. University is mostly a safe place to try different ideas and paths in life, trying them on for size. So it was at Oxford that Blair became a Trotskyist, stirring his left-wing political ideals. With his law degree in his hand, Tony Blair entered Chambers and was called to the bar in 1975. It was at Chambers in Lincoln's Inn Fields that Tony met his wife-to-be, Sherry Booth, daughter of a TV actor. Sherry and Tony married in 1980 and, just like the Queen, went on to have 4 children.
The fact that we were both active in the Labour Party, that gave us something in common.
Were you both active Labour Party members when you first met?
Yes, when we first met.
And in a sense, that was one of the...
And fellow sufferers at the bar, I suppose.
But you've also stood for a seat.
Oh, yes.
So you know what it's like when he's going through all this.
Yes. Well, Tony knows what it's like to be Mrs. MP.
It was
ghastly.
It was ghastly. I can't tell you how bad it was.
He didn't enjoy it very much.
No. But was that because
No,
you...
I have huge sympathy for anyone who's married to an MP.
Because you stood before
well,
Tony.
we both stood at the '83 election, but I got selected very, very late, so Cherie was already a candidate.
There was about a 6-month period, no more, when I was a candidate and Tony was still looking for a seat, and so he had to trail behind me.
Probably didn't do any harm, did it?
It probably didn't do any harm, but I certainly at the time felt it didn't do me any good.
The early 1980s in Britain was a heady time of growth, of excess, and of national optimism. But the royal family faced internal turmoil and occasional public criticism at the hands of the tabloid press. Thatcherism was dominating the political landscape. The Falklands had been recaptured from Argentinian invaders. 2 attempts had been made to assassinate the Queen, and security at Buckingham Palace had proved ineffective when an intruder was found sitting on the Queen's bed whilst she was in it.
So Michael Fagan visited Buckingham Palace twice but committed no offence. The idea came to him, he says, when visiting the palace with his children and studying the security. Each time he followed a similar route. On the occasion he found the Queen in her bedroom, he began by climbing the railings outside the ambassador's entrance and got into the stamp room through an unlocked window. But the internal door was locked, so he shinned up a drain pipe outside onto a flat roof, a roof now guarded by police.
This was the backdrop of Blair's first steps into Parliament, when he was elected MP for Sedgefield, a new constituency created from boundaries being redrawn in the northeast of England. The young MP quickly made a name for himself, being a persuasive and erudite speaker, and he was called to the front bench as a spokesman for the Treasury, going on to fulfill various senior roles as a spokesman over the next 3 years. The mid-1980s was a time of internal strife in the Labour Party, with Blair leading the charge to modernize, whilst the old guard, heavily influenced by the trades unions, held on to their leftist beliefs and principles. Power battles at the top led John Smith to being appointed as head of the Labour Party, but with Blair pushing for even more radical change and to end Labour's policy of trying to nationalize large swaths of British industry. Over the next few years, Blair worked tirelessly, still determined to change the Labour Party and to modernize its thinking, away from extreme left-wing socialist ideals into a more palatable picture of Labour politics. New Labour was the way forward, and Blair was quietly but determinedly pushing this new and radical center-left agenda. In May 1994, John Smith, leader of the Labour Party, died very suddenly of a heart attack, and the race for election of a Labour leader began.
We're here to hear an announcement from our MP, Tony Blair, and I'm sure it's a historic announcement for the constituency, a historic announcement for the Labour Party, and it will be a historic announcement for the country. Tony Blair.
This leadership election in the Labour Party is one that nobody expected or wanted. John Smith's death robbed the Labour Party of our leader and the country of its next Prime Minister. His loss is still with us, but the cause of democratic socialism, the cause to which he dedicated his life, must now go on. Like my good friends and colleagues, Margaret Beckett and John Prescott yesterday, this morning I'm announcing my candidature for the position of leader of the Labour Party.
His Christianity informs his politics and the way he conducts himself in political life, and Blair's charismatic manner would be the envy of any pulpit preacher.
The basic motivation, the belief in social justice, the notion that a fairer, more decent society helps the individual, to me that is a Christian as well as a socialist idea or ideal. But I don't preach God at people, and I don't like politicians that do, and it's something it's a part of me.
The behind-the-scenes maneuvers led to Gordon Brown ruling himself out of the fight.
In the end, these two close friends and political allies at the House of Commons this afternoon kept to an old agreement that they wouldn't fight each other for Labour's top job. But for Gordon Brown, it was an agonising decision because he'd found plenty of support, especially among Labour MPs in Scotland, for a leadership bid.
A lot of people disappointed, but I think they will see it as a very principled stand that he has taken. And perhaps it explains, again, why he will have an absolutely key role in the next Labour government.
The near certainty that in such a government Gordon Brown would hold one of the great offices of state, or most certainly Chancellor of the Exchequer, will have crossed his mind. But both his camp and Tony Blair's are emphasising that party unity.
And 2 months later, on 21st July 1994, Blair beat John Prescott and Margaret Beckett to become leader of the Labour Party. Blair now went into overdrive and steadily established himself as a charismatic and persuasive Labour leader.
The next election will offer us the chance to change our country. Not just to promise change, but to achieve it. The historic goal of another Labour government. Our party, New Labour. Our mission, New Britain. New Labour, New Britain.
In the lead up to the election, on a live Channel 4 interview, Blair draws his lines in the sand with his definition of New Labour and a radical and reformed Labour Party.
What does your concept of radical really involve?
It involves recognising that the basic principles of the Labour Party, which are about justice and progress, that's what the Labour Party should be about, that those principles should be applied in a different way to today's world. Back in 1945, when Clem Attlee and his government came in, they were a radical government in the sense that the way they thought to do it was to build up the state, nationalisation and so on. That's not the way for today's world. The way for today's world is education, skills, technology, developing small businesses, encouraging design and invention in Britain. It's a different role for government, it's a different relationship with industry, and it's a different attitude to the things that really matter.
Tony Blair later claims to have been most surprised when, on 1st May 1997, he was elected Britain's youngest Prime Minister since 1812, ending 18 years of Conservative rule with a majority of 179.
After 7 years in office and so many audiences with the Queen, this was to be the last. Mr. Major tendering his resignation as Prime Minister, the final formal termination of 18 years of Conservative government. John Major with his fellow survivors about to experience for the first time life in opposition. Tony Blair, meanwhile, was still at his North London home, basking in the glow of his astonishing political triumph and the applause of supporters camped out in the street. Soon his life would change forever. With a wave to the children, he was off, but not for long. Within seconds, he'd stopped the car for a walkabout, to the obvious surprise of the security team now guarding him. And after his short audience with the Queen, Mr. Blair emerged as the youngest Prime Minister this century, ready for the short drive to Downing Street and a first taste of government. Without doubt, there has been a seismic shift in British politics. The extraordinary swing to Labour has given them their biggest ever parliamentary majority and a chance to push through what's said to be the most radical constitutional reform package this century. A victorious Labour Prime Minister at the gates of Downing Street and a piece of political history. This was simply unprecedented. Tony and Cherie Blair walking up towards number 10, greeting jubilant party workers and some lucky members of the public allowed on this unique occasion to line the famous street. It was the end of an 18-year journey for the Labour Party, through 4 election defeats, 4 changes of leader, and times when some in their ranks feared they'd never get back from the political wilderness. And so to this moment, swept in on a tide of support not seen in post-war politics, Mr. Blair outlined his vision for New Labour in power.
It shall be a government rooted in strong values, the values of justice and progress and community, the values that have guided me all my political life, but a government ready with the courage to embrace the new ideas necessary to make those values live again for today's world. A government of practical measures in pursuit of noble causes.
In his later recollections of that meeting on 2nd May 1997, when the Queen asked Blair to form a government on her behalf, he said that the Queen had pointed out that her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, and that Blair had not been born when she first worked with Winston. It is hardly likely that the Queen will have been doing anything other than making an innocent observation about the length of time she had been serving her people. But Blair reportedly took it as being put in his place by the monarch. His famous words at the start of his premiership are delivered with passion and conviction.
A new dawn has broken, has it not? Always said that if we had the courage to change, then we could do it, and we did it. And let me say this to you. The British people have put their trust in us. It is a moving and it is a humbling experience. And the size of our likely majority now imposes a special sort of responsibility upon us.
Within a few weeks of taking office, Tony Blair hosted a Downing Street reception for big names from the creative industries, coining the phrase "Cool Britannia," and heralding his entry into popular politics as the world's first rock and roll prime minister. Those first few weeks of his premiership must have seemed a long way from his early life in Edinburgh, but it was not long before Blair was put to the test. On 31st August, some 3 months into his office, Diana, Princess of Wales, was killed in a car crash in Paris.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her 2 sons, the 2 boys. Our hearts go out to them. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain, throughout the world, with joy and with comfort, when with just a look or a gesture that spoke so much more than words, she would reveal to all of us the depth of her compassion and her humanity. The people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
In his tribute speech, Blair dubbed Diana the People's Princess, emphasizing the widening gap in public opinion following her divorce from Prince Charles, the future monarch. It is widely reported that Tony Blair advised Queen Elizabeth to return to London from her summer retreat at Balmoral. The Queen had remained there to console her young grandsons, William and Harry, both still children, in the wake of their mother's death, and it is widely thought that she believed her first duty at that time was to them. Public opinion, led by an ever-hungry tabloid press, started to take a critical tone, personally attacking the Queen, so her Prime Minister appealed to her to take her place at Buckingham Palace to lead the nation in mourning. The Queen's message, broadcast live from Buckingham Palace after her return, speaks of the affection she held for Diana and the ways in which she had touched the lives of so many people.
First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness.
Tonight at Kensington Palace, On the eve of a uniquely sad day, the people who love Diana are staging a final vigil.
It is sometimes speculated that the Queen's relationship with Tony Blair was the most difficult of all her prime ministers. Yet, Her Majesty never comments on any individual person or conversation, or refers to the weekly meetings she has with her prime ministers at Buckingham Palace. In a 1992 BBC documentary, however, the Queen said, "I have had quite a lot of prime ministers, starting with Winston. Some stayed longer than others. They unburden themselves, or they tell me what is going on or if they got any problems. Sometimes one can help in that way too." The Queen will have been most gracious when, reportedly, Blair inadvertently sat in Prince Philip's seat at an important function, but Blair quickly noticed his error and moved, raising a chuckle from the Duke of Edinburgh. The relationship cannot have got off to a good start when the Prime Minister's wife broke with centuries of etiquette and refused to curtsy to the Queen when they first met. Her Majesty is known to enjoy the country life, the great outdoors, nature and wilderness, and her beloved horses. The Blairs are both townies, preferring the city life, so the Blairs' annual trips to Balmoral for a summer break were getting shorter and shorter as the years went by. The working relationship between the Queen and her young Prime Minister was not improved when Tony Blair changed the decades-old tradition and moved the day of their weekly meetings, forcing a major rescheduling of the Queen's commitments for many months to come. Despite these alleged differences, in 1997, Blair heaped praise on both the Queen and Prince Philip at an after-dinner speech he made celebrating their golden wedding anniversary.
Actually, Your Majesty's closing words to me at Buckingham Palace on Tuesday, at the end of our weekly session, were, "Please don't be too effusive." Sorry, ma'am, but I'm from the Disraeli school of prime ministers in their relations with the monarch. And I can do it and praise you with feeling, because the praise is genuine and justified. I am honored to be your Prime Minister and to say to you today, ma'am, on behalf of the whole of the British nation, congratulations to you and Prince Philip on the occasion of your 50th wedding anniversary. You have our loyalty, our love, and our heartfelt thanks for all your years of devotion to us. Thank you.
He even talked of their weekly audiences being not quite what he had expected.
To think that the same weekly audiences that I have were once enjoyed by Churchill and Macmillan, people who to me seem figures of history. But I know that I speak for the former Prime Ministers present here today, Sir Edward Heath, Lord Callaghan, Lady Thatcher and John Major, when I say how invaluable and pleasurable those weekly audiences are. And that is for two reasons. First, if she will forgive me, though she is the Queen and the essence of dignity, it is a dignity that is very much down to earth. There are only two people in the world, frankly, to whom a Prime Minister can say what he likes about his cabinet colleagues. One's the wife and the other's the Queen. It is to them, of course, that we can express the full extent of our affection. But the other reason Prime Ministers enjoy the audience is one I will confess to you freely that I didn't quite believe until I became Prime Minister. For reasons not simply to do with her experience, though of course that helps, she is an extraordinarily shrewd and perceptive observer of the world. Hers is advice worth having.
Tony Blair's first term as Prime Minister was busy, still modernizing New Labour. In December 1997, one of his first and most unpopular moves saw him cut Social Security entitlements to single parents, despite opposition from 47 MPs within his own party. Tony Blair can be credited with bringing about numerous changes in UK domestic policy at the time: civil partnerships, equality of age of consent no matter one's sexual orientation, a minimum wage, increased devolution, and huge increases in spending on both health and education. In April 1998, the long-awaited Good Friday Agreement was finally hammered out, and Blair presided over the signing of that historic treaty, finally bringing a return to peaceful life for the people of Northern Ireland. Just 2 weeks before Christmas 1998, Tony Blair, in league with U.S. President Bill Clinton, launched airstrikes on Iraq, hoping to bring an end to the suffering of the Iraqi people. One may wonder at the conversation between the monarch and Blair when it was decided to attack Iraq, and the way in which the Prime Minister had justified the decision to his Queen. In fact, Blair sent British troops into action on 5 occasions during his 10 years in office, more than any recent British Prime Minister. It was Tony Blair who had the honor of being British Prime Minister when the calendar turned on a new millennium.
At the centrepiece of the celebrations, the Millennium Dome, the Prime Minister hugged his wife while the Queen kissed the Duke of Edinburgh. Then the audience broke into a chorus of Auld Lang Syne. Cherie Blair in full voice before the royal party had even linked arms.
Seeing in a new millennium, a new century, and a new era for Britain. In June 2001, Tony Blair had won a second term in office, taking a majority in the general election, and being invited by the Queen to again form a government on her behalf. Little did he know that just a few months later, he would be presiding over historic events which still reverberate to this day.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
In September 2001, the greatest tragedy in American history hit New York City. 2 airplanes flew directly into the World Trade Center. Panic and fear filled the city, thousands running for their life with no idea what was happening. It was the greatest terrorist attack in history, killing almost 3,000 people and seriously injuring many more. The world was left shocked, and the emotional distress in the city was overwhelming. Standing next to New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, the British Prime Minister vowed to stand with the United States and to do whatever was necessary to bring an end to what became the War on Terror.
All I want to say here now is just our profound sympathy, obviously, of course, with the people of New York, and as we know, there are many British people missing as well. We were just talking, the governor and the mayor and myself, a moment or two ago, about the need to stand together at this time. If you just forgive me, I'll say this, that I can only imagine what it must have been like for people in New York over these past 9 days. But my father's generation knew what it was like. They went through the Blitz. They know what it's like to suffer this type of tragedy and attack. And there was one country and one people that stood by us at that time. And that country was America, and those people were the American people. And as you stood side by side with us then, we stand side by side with you now. Your loss we count as our loss. Your struggle we take as our struggle.
It means a great deal to the people of the city. to see the support that we have in Great Britain, throughout the world, and we know we share this loss with so many of your citizens. And I believe that we are much closer together than we've ever been before, much more united, and much closer together. And I thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister.
In November 2001, after presenting limited evidence to Parliament and to the British people, Blair decided to act in concert with George Bush Jr., U.S. President at that time, who was determined to finish the job his father had started, to rid the people of Iraq of their dictatorial leader, who was alleged to be providing shelter and safe haven to terrorists. There was furious debate over the next year or so, and over 2 million people marched in opposition to Britain going into the Middle East conflict once again. "2002 was a most difficult year for the Queen and the nation. Her sister, Princess Margaret, died in February of a stroke.
I know the whole country will be deeply saddened by Princess Margaret's death. She will be remembered with a lot of affection. Before she was ill, in the last few years, she gave a great deal of service to the country, and our thoughts are obviously with the Queen, with the Queen Mother, and with all the royal family at this difficult time.
Only a month later, the Queen Mother's life also came to an end as she died in her sleep.
Ever since my beloved mother died over a week ago, I have been deeply moved by the outpouring of affection which has accompanied her death. My family and I always knew what she meant for the people of this country, and the special place she occupied in the hearts of so many here, in the Commonwealth, and in other parts of the world.
However, at the time of her Golden Jubilee in June 2002, the Queen's address to Parliament from Westminster Hall included these wise words.
Change has become a constant. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. The way we embrace it defines our future.
Everyone reflects on the huge affection that this nation feels for you. As a lady put it to me at the street party in the village of Trimden in County Durham yesterday, we don't just respect her, we love her. I believe that you have succeeded because you have a quality that is not a quality that belongs alone to kings or queens, presidents or prime ministers, or to the famous and celebrated. It is a quality that is the very best of the British character, and when we find it, we recognize it immediately.
If you were one of those who hoped that tonight's summit between Tony Blair and George Bush was a last chance to urge restraint, a last chance to urge that more time be given before a decision to go to war, you look set to be disappointed. There will be delay, but only, it seems, for the diplomatic noose to tighten around Saddam Hussein's neck.
I spoke to the Prime Minister before his talks with the President began. He spoke again of the twin threats of terrorism and rogue states like Iraq. Was he here, I asked him, to urge George Bush on or to hold him back?
I'm here to argue for the position I've always argued for. And I've raised this issue of weapons of mass destruction for ages. So it's not a question of George Bush wanting to do this or anyone else wanting to do it. I believe it is necessary in the interests of this country. And it is only when we deal with these threats that we will usher in a greater sense of order and stability in the world, and incidentally also restore some order and stability to the economy of the world today, which is overshadowed, of course, by these threats.
So when does Saddam Hussein reach the point of no return?
Well, it's being reached, isn't it? I mean, it can't go on like this. What does the whole of our history teach us? I mean, British history in particular, that if when you're faced with a threat, you decide to avoid confronting it short term, then all that happens is that in the longer term, you have to confront it in an even more deadly form. That's what I'm trying to avoid now.
The debate continued on the War of Terror, and in March 2003, Saddam Hussein failed to comply with UN requests for information. Britain published the infamous dossier detailing that the Iraqi leader had the means to deploy weapons of mass destruction within 45 minutes, a report which was criticized in the media.
This was the moment the Prime Minister's long-awaited dossier of evidence was finally released in Downing Street. There was a scramble as reporters rushed to take away the document, which the government hopes will win doubters over to its view that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and must be stopped. In the House of Commons too, MPs who've been recalled to Parliament arrived early to collect it. They had 3 hours to read it before the debate. During that time, the Prime Minister had another hurdle to overcome. He met Labour's governing body, the NEC, which includes some who are very worried about possible military action against Iraq. Mr Blair assured them his preferred route was through the UN, but some still fear that may not happen.
Everybody who spoke around the table said that people were extremely worried about unilateral military action against Iraq.
Robin Cook, Blair's long-serving foreign secretary, resigned in protest as he was vehemently opposed to Britain's involvement. After much negotiation and persuasion, the United Nations would still not give a clear mandate to invade Iraq and unseat Saddam Hussein, so Bush and Blair decided to go it alone. To go to war usually requires a debate in Parliament, but not a vote, as only the sovereign has the power to declare war. But Tony Blair thought it vital to get the feeling of Parliament in his quest to help Bush take decisive steps in the war on terror. On the 18th March 2003, a quarter of Labour MPs voted against the government decision to go to war with Iraq, but to no effect.
On Tuesday night, I gave the order for British forces to take part in military action in Iraq. Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. I know this course of action has produced deep divisions of opinion in our country. But I know also the British people will now be united in sending our armed forces our thoughts and prayers. They are the finest in the world, and their families and all of Britain can have great pride in them. My judgment as Prime Minister is that this threat is real, growing, and of an entirely different nature to any conventional threat to our security that Britain has faced before.
On 20th March 2003, the war on Iraq began when U.S. forces and their allies launched the first airstrikes on Baghdad. British troops went to war, and that presence in the Middle East has remained to this day. A note was released in the Chilcot Report, an investigation into the war with Iraq.
Mr. Blair wrote to President Bush with an assurance that he would be with him whatever.
Mr. Blair's diplomatic efforts to get UN support for the war are also heavily criticised.
In the absence of a majority in support of military action, we consider that the UK was, in fact, undermining the Security Council's authority.
As head of all the armed services, Her Majesty the Queen is constantly vigilant to anything which may place her troops in unnecessary danger. So we can be certain that this support of the United States will have been on her mind, and most likely their agendas at their weekly chats. There was a growing tide of unease in the country, and Blair's weekly meetings with the sovereign must also have focused in on the progress in bringing about a quick and painless resolution to the conflict in Iraq. In May 2003, cracks were appearing in Blair's support in the cabinet. And in that month, Claire Short, one of Blair's longest and most staunch critics from within the Labour Party, finally quit over the Iraq issue, saying Tony Blair had broken promises and had invaded Iraq with no United Nations mandate. In BBC interviews, she described him as reckless. On 14th December 2003, U.S. soldiers found Saddam Hussein hiding in a hole in the ground just outside Tikrit. He was captured and put on trial and later executed.
The shadow of Saddam is finally lifted from the Iraqi people. We give thanks for that. But let this be more than a cause simply for rejoicing. Let it be a moment to reach out and to reconcile.
Blair's opponents in the Labour Party never gave up on the idea of holding him to account for his presidential acts and the way he bulldozed the British people into going to war. On 14th July 2004, the Butler Report found that some intelligence on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction had turned out to be unreliable, but that Blair acted in good faith. No trace of any weapons of mass destruction were ever found. Many years later, in 2016, Blair would give a statement accepting responsibility for his actions, whilst still maintaining he made the best decision he could with the information he had.
The decision to go to war in Iraq and to remove Saddam Hussein from power in a coalition of over 40 countries led by the United States of America was the hardest, most momentous, most agonizing decision I took in my 10 years as British Prime Minister. For that decision today, I accept full responsibility, without exception and without excuse.
The Nazis continued with Blair pressing on with social and economic reforms, and with him taking the lead at a vital climate change conference. Nonetheless, in October 2004, possibly weary of the criticisms leveled at him over the Iraq affair, Blair has spoken on numerous occasions about the working relationship he had at that time with Queen Elizabeth. And in these especially difficult times, the Christian faith they share must have featured in their regular tete-a-tetes. The Queen is known to turn to her faith to guide her in difficult and dark times, as is Tony Blair. And it is these principles and ideals which must have overridden any difficulties between them. On 6th February 2005, Tony Blair became the longest-serving Labour Prime Minister, overtaking the combined length of Harold Wilson's terms in office. Perhaps spurred on by the longevity of his successes, Tony Blair decided to stay at the forefront of the Labour fight and to see his vision of new Labour through to fruition.
His future in your hands. Will it be 4 more years or just 4 more weeks?
Are you confident, Prime Minister?
With a smile that said yes, it was off to ask Her Majesty's permission to go to the country. The trip down the Mall to the palace may look like a formality, mere ceremony, but it is a demonstration that the Prime Minister no longer controls his own destiny. All this, the car, the flunkies, the power, could go if voters so choose. Back in Downing Street, he talked of values, of a big positive vision, all designed, his aides say, to give angry voters a reason to return to Labour.
As you know, I've just been to Buckingham Palace to ask the Queen to dissolve Parliament, which she's graciously consented to do, and there will be a general election in Britain on May the 5th. It's a big choice, and a fundamental choice, and there's a lot at stake. And our mission will be driven by values. I also want to talk to the country about the values that motivate us. I believe in a country where hard work and merit, not privilege or background, determine success. A country where Britain's families get the modern healthcare, education, childcare services they need, and on a fair and equal basis. It's a big decision. The British people are the boss, and they're the ones that will make it.
That was the signal for all the party leaders to take to the skies in search of votes.
He fought for a 3rd term in office, and he won with a majority of 66 in the Commons. He could never have guessed he may be in office for so long. In July 2005, the Prime Minister was hosting a G8 summit which resulted in significant agreements to write off debt and massively boost aid to developing countries. However, in the middle of agreements, London was hit with several bomb attacks. 52 people were killed.
Ever since September the 11th, we were told this day was inevitable. Today, all the alerts, the scares, the predictions became a quite appalling reality. Without warning, without provocation, 4 blasts ripped through London's transport system at a time of the morning when the bombers knew the buses and trains would be full almost beyond capacity. 10 to 9 in the morning, a bomb rips through a train between Liverpool Street and Aldgate. Above ground, no one is sure if this is an attack or an accident. There are reports of a crash. Another suggests power surges were to blame. Those on the train knew exactly what it was.
You knew it was a bomb straight away, so just trying not to panic, really.
What were people doing?
We broke the door to our carriage down, and then because there was so much smoking and it was black everywhere, there was no lights, and we just moved people down through the carriages.
So much smoke, people panicking, and then people started to calm down. People wanted to get to the back of the train away from the danger area, but there was nowhere for them to go. And then they took us off the train and made us walk all the way back past it all. Dead bodies on the tracks, train blown open.
The way the emergency services were responding soon told Londoners that this was no ordinary accident. Soon after 9:30, the second explosion, this time at West London's Edgware Road. The bomb was on one tube train. 2 others were caught up in its blast. In their first attack, the bombers had killed 7. At Edgware Road, they took another 5, quite innocent lives, and injured scores more.
The Queen has just issued her reaction to today's events in London. It says, the dreadful events in London this morning have deeply shocked us all. I know I speak for the whole nation in expressing my sympathy to all those affected and the relatives of the killed and injured. I have nothing but admiration, she goes on, for the emergency services as they go about their work.
This has been a most terrible and tragic atrocity that has cost many innocent lives. When they try to intimidate us, we will not be intimidated. When they seek to change our country or our way of life by these methods, we will not be changed. When they try to divide our people or weaken our resolve, we will not be divided, and our resolve will hold firm.
The mood of the country began to change in the wake of the attacks in London. 2005 was the beginning of the end for Tony Blair. In the very last weeks of 2005, David Cameron was elected head of the Conservative opposition, and the infighting within the Labour ranks grew, with no cohesive agreement on a wide array of important issues. The swing away from the left was to continue a long way past the centrist policies offered by the Blairite cabinet. 2006 was the year in which Labour lost over 300 council seats in local elections, and MPs demanded a timetable for Tony's departure. Gordon Brown was a prime minister in waiting, but he did not wish to wait much longer. 2007 had its highs and lows, both for the Queen and for Tony Blair. The London terrorist bombings will have been fresh in her mind when she was visited by Tony Blair to let her know of his plans to resign and to hand the baton to his long-suffering opponent, Gordon Brown. Blair had listened to the old adage of keeping your friends close and your enemies even closer. But their differences on a wide array of issues were growing. Blair was afraid that his growing unpopularity in some safe Labour seats would have them ousted from government in the next election. So he took the decision in June 2007 to hand over the reins to Gordon Brown. Tony Blair finally bowed to the pressures of his colleagues in the Labour Party and his 10-year stretch as Britain's youngest Prime Minister finally came to an end. In his resignation speech, he acknowledged the challenges and disappointments he and the British people had faced.
I've been Prime Minister of this country for just over 10 years. In this job, in the world of today, I think that's long enough for me, but more especially for the country. And sometimes, the only way you conquer the pull of power is to set it down.
New Labour had been his answer to all that, a blend of liberal and small-c conservative instincts. Mr Blair acknowledged it had had its disappointments.
And expectations were so high. Too high, probably. Too high in a way for either of us. And now in 2007, you can easily point to the challenges or the things that are wrong or the grievances that fester. Great expectations. Not fulfilled in every part for sure. Occasionally, people say, as I said earlier, the expectations were too high. You should have lowered them. But to be frank, I would not have wanted it any other way. I was, and remain as a person, and as a Prime Minister, an optimist. Politics may be the art of the possible, but at least in life, give the impossible a go.
After repeating his defence of his actions over Iraq, he pleaded with his critics to give him credit for his good intentions.
But I ask you to accept one thing. Hand on heart, I did what I thought was right.
At the start of it all, there was a Prime Minister and a government full of hope for the future, and with some radical ideas for real change. But it gradually morphed into a reactive regime, answering the call of evolving crises on the world stage. Through the many highs and lows of his stay at 10 Downing Street, Tony Blair could only have gained solace and support from his Queen and monarch. Their shared Christian values and her vast experience on the world stage would have enabled them both to overcome any differences they may have had at the start of his 10 years as the Queen's Prime Minister. Like most ex-Prime Ministers, Tony Blair went on to take a back seat to the political world, but to use his influence and experience to bring about the changes he so passionately wanted to make whilst in office. Blair is credited with effecting many radical changes to the culture of British politics and life in the United Kingdom, but he is now perhaps finishing some of the work which he did not have time to complete before he resigned. The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, a not-for-profit organization, was set up to make globalization work for the many, not for the few. Its work continues to this day. Blair's legacy is still very much felt, and the changes and actions he fought for have caused great changes to modern-day Britain. His approach, he commonly called the Third Way, changed the course of the Labour Party. And whilst many are left with a bitter aftertaste, no Labour leaders achieved the time and power that Tony Blair held. Blair's Britain saw the Good Friday Agreement reached and began peace in Northern Ireland. The introduction of minimum wage, the Freedom of Information Act, and much more. With the 9/11 attacks leading to what many people saw as an unnecessary war on Iraq, he faced wide criticism for his choices, and many felt his focus on the war meant much of what was promised in election campaigns was not implemented, even after 10 years in office. The Chilcot Report, investigating the decisions to go to war with Iraq, were not flattering of Blair, with conclusions that there was no real imminent threat from Saddam Hussein, and the dossier released in 2002 distorted the intelligence. Years later, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn apologized for the disastrous decision to go to war. Blair has defended his decision over the years, and whether he was right or wrong, it has defined his time as Prime Minister. to Her Majesty the Queen. He may have been, perhaps, one of her most controversial prime ministers.